Hey everybody, I'm Chef Scott. Welcome to the Devil's Food Kitchen channel. A year ago, one of my oldest, dearest friends and his wife had a beautiful little girl, and now it's her first birthday, and I have been honored with making her first birthday cake. That's exactly what we're doing today. Little Max loves bananas, so we're gonna make a banana cake with a banana cream filling and an Italian meringue buttercream. We're also gonna use some fondant to create some decorative elements to finish the cake off. Links to a print-friendly recipe and all the equipment I'm using are in the description below. And if you'd like to jump ahead to the method, you can do that now. I do have some recipe tips for this week that we're gonna get into right now. Notes this week are really about the banana cake. If you'd like some of the food science behind pastry cream, you can check that out in my 101 pastry cream video. And in the near future, I'll be doing a similar video on Italian meringue buttercream. I'm gonna show you the methods of all of the steps in this video, but only talk about the food science of the cake. The banana cake we're making today is part of a family of cakes known as high ratio cakes. And that refers to the higher ratio of sugar in relation to the rest of the ingredients. That large amount of sugar is going to play a role in every facet of this cake. First and foremost, it's going to make the cake sweet. So you want to make sure to balance that sweetness with whatever filling and frosting you're using. Don't go too heavy on the sugar on those elements, otherwise the total package is going to be too sweet. The large amount of sugar is also going to bring moisture to the cake, which is a good thing. Sugar is hygroscopic, it is water attracting, and any recipe that has a lot of sugar in it will generally hold that moisture. And in the end, that's going to keep the cake from drying out. The large amount of sugar in the recipe, combined with using cake flour, means that we don't really have to worry about gluten development. Sugar molecules get in the way of protein chains when they're trying to bind to create gluten, and cake flour has low protein content to begin with. So although the cardinal rule is generally do not overmix, if we don't mix properly with this cake, we're not going to get a good finished texture. When you undermix this cake batter, you don't incorporate any air and you wind up with a very dense cake. By properly mixing this cake, you whip air into the batter and that helps the rise and giving you a light cake texture. Now I get a lot of questions from you guys about how to substitute flours. If you don't have cake flour, what can you use? If you don't have pastry flour, what can you use? I highly recommend cake flour for this. It's going to give you the best result when you're making a cake. But if you can't find cake flour, you're just gonna have to use the lowest protein flour you can find, either pastry flour or all-purpose flour. And with those higher protein flours, you will have to reduce the mixing time slightly so you don't develop too much gluten. Lastly, the large amount of sugar is going to affect the bake of the cake. I like to bake my high ratio cakes between 300 and 330 degrees Fahrenheit, depending on the strength of your oven. So if you're baking at home, 330 degrees is going to be the way to go. At 350 degrees or higher, the sugar in the cake is going to caramelize and brown long before the cake is done baking, and you're going to get a very thick, dense, dark crust, which we don't want. So by baking at a lower temperature, you allow the cake to bake without that sugar caramelizing. I may also underfill a few cake rings rather than properly filling one cake ring. And the reason being is that less batter is going to bake faster, and we again eliminate that dark crust that we don't want. Like most of my recipes, I call for some type of vanilla, in this case vanilla extract. And in particular, we're going to use Mexican vanilla extract. Now, Mexican vanilla is a variety of bean that has a lot of flavor notes of spice, and that's going to mix really well with the banana in the recipe and the spices we're adding. It's one of those little nuances that can elevate your baked goods from being good to great. I do have a link to that Mexican vanilla in the description below, but at the end of the day, use whatever vanilla you have, it's still going to make a great cake. For our banana cream filling, we're going to be making a pastry cream with fresh bananas in it. All I'll say for this video is that by using fresh bananas, we're going to have a banana cream that will oxidize quickly or turn brown when exposed to air. So you want to make sure to keep that element as airtight as possible and make it towards the end of the process just before you're going to use it. Once you incorporate it into the cake, it'll effectively be sealed and you don't have to worry about oxidizing. But this isn't the type of thing that you want to make and leave in the refrigerator for a day or two because it's going to get that brown color to it. Those are all of the notes I have for this week, so we're ready to get started with our cake. Blend the bananas in a food processor until smooth. Keep the pureed banana covered with plastic wrap to touch until you're ready to use it. This will keep it from oxidizing. Prepare your cake ring with a thin, even coat of butter, followed by an even coat of flour. Any flour will do. Place the cake ring on a square of tinfoil, then fold the tinfoil edges over once or twice to reinforce them. Next, fold the tinfoil up to the side of the cake ring and crimp it into itself around the ring. Pull the tinfoil tight to the cake ring while you work to create a good seal. Combine the baking soda and cake flour and sift. I return the sifted ingredients to a bowl for use later. Combine the butter, sugar, vanilla, and spices and mix until well combined, about 2 to 3 minutes. Add the eggs and a few additions, mixing well with each addition. Halfway through the process, scrape the bowl really well. Add the sour cream, again mixing until combined. Add half of the banana puree and half of the sifted dry ingredients, then mix on medium speed for 2 to 3 minutes. Add the remaining puree and dry ingredients and mix on medium speed for 3 to 4 minutes. The batter should be smooth and somewhat glossy when it's finished, which is a good sign of emulsification. Fill your cake rings with equal portions of batter. In this case, each of my cake rings gets a third of the batter and will be half full before baking.
You must remember this, a kiss is still a kiss.
After removing the cakes from the oven, cover them with a clean tea towel to cool for 15 to 20 minutes. Once cool, remove the cakes from the rings. Wrap the cakes in plastic wrap and keep them in Ziploc bags at room temperature to use later. This will keep them from drying out. Add the milk to a sauce pot and begin warming it over medium heat. Combine the cornstarch and sugar and mix well. Add the cornstarch mixture to the egg yolks, whisking well to fully combine. Bring the milk to a simmer and add it to the egg yolks in a few small additions. This will warm the eggs and prevent them from cooking too quickly. Be sure to whisk rapidly as you add the hot milk. Return everything to the sauce pot, whisking continuously. Cook while whisking over medium heat until the pastry cream thickens. Once thickened, continue to cook for 1 minute to remove any starchy flavor. Add the banana and hand blend until the pastry cream is smooth. Pour the pastry cream onto the prepared sheet pan and cover with plastic wrap to touch. Chill the pastry cream for 1 to 2 hours. It will still be thin once it's set. Before beginning, roughly chop the butter and bring it to room temperature. Combine the water and sugar in a sauce pot. Whisk the mixture over medium heat to begin to dissolve the sugar. Remove the whisk and stop whisking altogether once the sugar begins to boil. Once the sugar begins boiling, add a thermometer and start whisking your egg whites. Begin whisking the egg whites on medium speed. They should be fully foamed with no clear egg white remaining by the time the sugar syrup reaches 121 Celsius or 250 degrees Fahrenheit. When the syrup reaches temperature, it's ready to add to the egg whites. Turn the mixture to high speed and pour a thin, even stream of the syrup into the egg whites down the side of the bowl. Avoid pouring the sugar over the whisk. Whisk the meringue on medium-high speed for about 10 minutes until the meringue thickens and cools. At this stage, the meringue will be at a soft peak. Add the butter on low speed, mixing until the buttercream begins to come together. Once thickened, switch to a paddle attachment and whip on medium-high speed for 2 to 3 minutes.
Imagine, if you will, sitting down to your morning coffee, turning on your home computer.
Cut the domes off of each cake. Make a small cut around the rim of the cake and then work toward the center with longer cutting strokes. Allow the knife to do the work. Don't force the blade or you'll tear the cake.
Science editor Steve Newman reports on one person already using...
After all of the cakes have been flattened, fill a piping bag with the Italian meringue buttercream. No tip is needed for this method. Simply cut about 3/4 of an inch off of the tip of the bag. Pipe a rope of buttercream around the outer edge of the first layer of cake. Add banana cream filling to the center of the cake and spread it evenly, flush with the top of the piped buttercream. Place the next layer of cake onto the filling and buttercream and press gently to adhere it evenly. Repeat this process for the next layer of cake and then add the top and final cake layer. Pipe buttercream to fill out any gaps in the side of the cake, then scrape the sides smooth, removing excess buttercream. Add buttercream to the top and sides of the cake. Because I still have buttercream in my piping bag, I'm piping it on, but you could use a spatula for this step too. Begin smoothing the top of the cake first, holding your offset spatula still while moving the cake table. Make sure your spatula is held at a flat angle during this step. Smooth the sides of the cake using the same method in an offset spatula or bench scraper. Fill in any gaps of buttercream and smooth them too. This coating of buttercream doesn't have to be perfectly smooth since we'll be covering it with fondant. Once the sides of the cake are smooth and straight, strike the excess buttercream off of the top lip of the cake using an offset spatula moving from the edge of the cake to the center. I wipe the spatula clean between my fingers with each pass, holding the buttercream on the back of my finger. This is an old bakery production trick that works great. Place the cake back in the fridge for at least 30 minutes. Soften the fondant by kneading it for 1 to 2 minutes. Avoid adding unnecessary air into the fondant during this step. Add your coloring to the center of the fondant and briefly work it into the surface. Knead the fondant until the color is smooth and consistent. Add color through the process if necessary, and keep in mind the color of the fondant will lighten slightly with air drying. Apply a light coat of cornstarch to your work surface before rolling out the fondant. I like to use cheesecloth to distribute the cornstarch. Roll the fondant like you would any other dough, although I like using a PVC pin for fondant specifically. Once the fondant is nearly a 1/4 inch thick, begin to slide the rolling pin across it rather than rolling. Work the fondant until it is a 1/4 inch in thickness. Check to make sure the fondant is wide enough to cover your cake board. Apply a light coat of water to the cake board, which will act as glue for the fondant. Place the fondant onto the board and buff it with a fondant smoother. Trim the excess fondant from the edge of the cake board with a paring knife. Place a cake ring that matches your cake in the center of the cake board. Press lightly to create a ring mark. Using clay sculpting tools, begin to outline leaves and jungle plants in the fondant. Gradually deepen the lines with a few passes. Since this cake is based on the book Where the Wild Things Are, I used illustrations from the book as reference for the style of plants I created. I use a scribe tool to make the first marks, then press the fondant down around those lines to create a relief effect that adds dimension. Details are always important with a project like this. Here I'm using the end of a sculpting tool to create detail marks that mimic the book's illustration style and add texture to the design. After sculpting the design into the fondant, I clean the excess from the sides of the board one more time, this time using a razor blade for a very clean cut. Using the same cake ring that I marked the fondant with, I stamp out the center and remove it from the board. Don't wait to do this step or the water will dry and the fondant will be glued to the board and hard to remove. Rolling the fondant for the cake follows the same process as the cake board. Soften the fondant by kneading it for 1 to 2 minutes. Prep your work surface with cornstarch and begin to roll the fondant with a rolling pin. Add cornstarch when needed and roll the fondant to 1/8 inch thick. Use a sliding motion with the pin to finish the step. Gently drape the fondant over the cake. Using a fondant smoother, seal and smooth the fondant to the top of the cake first, then using the knife edge of your hand, seal the top 1 inch of the sides. Gently begin to work the fondant down the side of the cake, spreading the skirt of loose fondant and using the knife edge of your hand to adhere it to the sides of the cake in small increments. Don't work on one portion of the cake alone. Instead, work around the cake evenly as you move down the sides. Once the fondant has been worked down the side of the cake, smooth with the fondant smoother, then trim the excess fondant from the base of the cake. Press and smooth the bottom edge of the cake. This will be hidden for this particular project. Roll a smaller piece of white fondant to 1/8 of an inch thick. Use a cake ring the size of your cake to check that the fondant is wide enough. There should be about 2 inches of extra fondant beyond the ring. With a paring knife, cut a jagged, uneven pattern of petal shapes around the ring of fondant. This is an abstract design cue of Max's costume in the book. Apply a small amount of water to the top of the cake. Center the cut fondant on the top of the cake and smooth and adhere it with a fondant smoother. Gently roll the pattern down the side of the cake without adhering it to the sides. Apply a small dot of glucose or buttercream to the center of the cake board. Transfer the cake to the cake board using an offset spatula. To create a tail detail, shape a small piece of fondant into a log about 4 inches long and then taper both ends. Bring one end to a point and give the shape a gentle curve. Glue the base of the tail to the cake using a small amount of water or egg white. I'm applying the water with my knife. To achieve texture that imitates the book illustration, dot the tail with the tip of a paring knife. I made Max's iconic crown from paper so that Birthday Max could wear it. Cut a strip of paper about 4 3/4 inches wide by 17 inches long. I found a cardstock paper that had gold on one side of it. Mark and cut triangle points on one half of the paper to create the points of the crown. I have a link to the paper I'm using in the description below. Test the connection of the crown to make sure that it will fit the top of the cake and trim it if needed. I like to take note of exactly where the connection point is during this step. Connect the ends of the crown together with hot glue or a piece of double-sided tape. With some of the remaining gold paper, I cut 2 strips the length of the paper and as wide as the cake board is tall, in this case about 3/4 of an inch. Test the fit of the strips on your cake so they create seams on the sides and not the front. Glue the strips of gold paper to the cake board with hot glue. This is the last detail of the project.